Hello everyone and welcome to Connecting Voices. The topic that we're discussing today is transparency in the extractive industry sector. And to help us understand this topic better, we have two guests with us today. We have Franz Ronsholt, who is a public financial management and development effectiveness expert, in addition of being the former BIFA Secretariat. And also we have with us Frank Bisset. Frank is the Senior Financial Management Specialist in the Middle East and North Africa region, based in Tunisia. So, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
So, let me start by the basic question to make sure that we're all on the same page. What constitutes natural resources?
Well, when we talk about natural resources in the context of extractive industries, we're talking about subsoil physical assets like oil and gas and various kinds of minerals that can be extracted for the good of the country. Mm-hmm. And it depends very much on the different countries which kind of material we are talking about. In the MENA region, most of the countries are really extracting mostly oil and gas, mm-hmm. Even though there are a couple of more mineral dependent countries like Morocco.
Okay. I imagine we don't have many forests, so I understand. The second part is that many of these countries face what we call the curse, because yes, it is a blessing to have these natural resources, yet it's a curse that leads to cases of corruption, cases of war, and why is that? Why is that happening?
Well, there's several reasons for that. One is the enclave nature of the extractive industry. Mm-hmm. It's something that can operate fairly de-linked from the rest of the economy, mm-hmm. Both in terms of linkages between with the other sectors of the economy, but also geographically, mm-hmm. That it can be concentrated in a small area of the country. That means that the ability to bring it into the whole economic development is not as strong as with other sectors, and also that it is something that can be utilized as a resource and revenue stream even in situations as civil war. On top of that, there's some issues regarding the complexity of the extractive industry sector and how you actually turn this physical asset into a financial asset and a revenue stream for the government. One has to remember that this is a resource which is limited. It will be exhausted sooner or later, in some countries fairly early on, in other countries at a much later stage. But it also means that it is something that can be extracted without the direct involvement of, for instance, the citizens as taxpayers or other institutions like international lenders that will usually have sort of some oversight, monitoring, and conditionality mechanisms in place when it's providing resources to the country. And that's not really the case with extractive industries, which is managed mainly as an agreement between the government and some large extracting companies. So some of the natural accountability and oversight mechanisms do not work so obviously in the extractive sector as it does in other parts of the economy. Also the limitation of the resource means that when there is a conflict between different parts of the country, there's the question of who gets to control the utilization of this resource, which will not be there forever. And this can easily lead to fights over the control of the extractive industry and the particular geographical areas in which this industry operates.
Frank, based on what Franz told us, you can see the complexity and the interesting nature of this area. How do you see supreme audit institutions engaging in this area, especially when we talk about accountability, for instance?
Sure. This is really an issue. For me, there are two issues. First of all, there is the issue of access to information. I mean, in a lot of our countries in the MENA region, I mean, some of the supreme audit institutions simply do not have access to oil ministries, cannot audit them, or do not have access to data about extractive industry revenues and how they are managed and used. And this is the first issue that still is with us in a number of countries. And then there is the issue probably of capacity. I mean, we are talking about an area where you have large companies with armies of lawyers, complex contracts, and you need very specific skills in these institutions to be able to really, audit this. I think it is very clear if you look at the INTOSAI norms for external audit in the public sector. It is very clear that this is public money, and this is an area that needs to be under the scrutiny of supreme audit institutions. Now, how do we build capacity? How do we help the supreme audit institutions in the region to build capacity to be able to look at these issues? I mean, this is another question. We are working now currently with the Supreme Audit Institution of Iraq to help them build this type of specific skills, and we are working in partnership with INTOSAI Development Donor Initiative, the idea based in Oslo. We've received also a request for support from the Supreme Audit Institution in Yemen. So this is really an area that is critical for these SAIs, and I mean, in a context where also there is an increasing demand for transparency coming from civil society, I think really the SAIs want to play these roles. I mean, the question of extractive industries and how the revenues are shared, for instance, has been under debate in Tunisia, which is not an exporting country, but still has a large sector of extractive industry, mining of phosphate and oil and gas, and the question of how are the contracts awarded, how do we share the revenues. I mean, all the revenues are coming from the south of the country, and there is a perception that the revenues are spent in the north, in the big cities, and these areas are not benefiting. So there has been CSOs and other civil society organizations and parliamentarians also have raised this issue. And I think in these countries, I mean, this is the case in Tunisia, I mean, the Supreme Audit Institution would like to build the capacity and be able to provide information and report and investigate in this area. Yeah.
I understand also we're working on this survey that you're leading together with France on the area of natural resources, etc., and use it. Can you give us a general idea what is this survey, what is it about in general?
I mean, this is a survey that is not trying to add additional knowledge, but more to look in a certain way, in a systematic way, at the existing literature about the linkages between extractive industry and the PFM systems. I mean, because there are various ways to manage these revenues, and this has an impact on a lot of things. I mean, on resource management, of course, because the more you have extractive industry revenues, then the tax issue is posed in a different fashion, and then it has an impact on on cash management. This has an impact on also the capacity of the government to spend this money, this additional money. What do we do with this bonus? So I mean, it's a question of public investment management, and it's a question of, so the whole PFM system is impacted. So the survey will look at how we can, in the MENA region, try to have a kind of picture of how these things are managed, and maybe find ways to dig deeper in the future in some particular areas.
Excellent. Franz?
Yeah, I think that what we're trying to do here is to, as Frank explained, use the information that is available and try to see how MENA countries are doing in terms of a set of what you say international standards on how extractive industry and resource revenue should be managed. In that respect, it's important to remember here that most of these international standards are about transparency, whereas the specific way you set up the institutions, the rules, regulations and legislation on how these institutions are designed can follow many different models. There's not usually one particular model that is seen as the best, but being transparent about exactly how you've done it, what model have you used, what decisions, for instance, do you use in terms of allocating resource revenue between today's budget, future budgets, stabilization of revenue over time, and so on. That's the kind of things we're looking at. Are government actually deciding this? Are they making these decisions available to the public so everybody can understand how the resource flows are being managed in a proper way?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Franz, for that. Thank you, Frank, and thank you for joining us.